director, sometime director, writer of movies. And so recently when I said make a PowerPoint presentation, he said, okay, well send me the software and I'll see what I can do. Then I got a call from him about a month and a half later. You won't believe what I've got. This is incredible. I've got clips, 10, 15, 20 clips. I've got sound. I've got all he was building virtually a massive presentation. That's what a movie producer does. So he's new to PowerPoint, but not new to making media. And so we're kind of pushing the envelope here. The biggest problem is we don't have sound access, but we're going to try to get a mic in there. And Laurie Harcola is going to do that. But while we're waiting for that, let me tell you a little bit about Paul. Another example of the kind of people who are getting into this field, looking at these issues, talented. Paul is an artist, writer, as I said before, director. He does wonderful paintings, which are on his website. And yet this issue isn't very important to him. Why? He's a college-educated man. He has a very substantial background, and he understands it's true. It's common sense. You just look at the evidence, it's a done deal. So he's in the Hollywood realm. His wife is a executive with Universal Pictures. And the fact is that in Hollywood, this is where the major money and the major benefits have gone about the ET issue. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars have been made portraying this issue to the American people who eat it up because they know something's there. And that's going to continue. Steven Spielberg recently did a 20-hour miniseries which aired in the span of about a year, something like 290 hours between the United States, Canada, and Britain. So Paul is someone who's got a special take on these things. But particularly because of his background in Hollywood, he knows the interaction between the entertainment industry and the issue, which is very complex and subtle, and it will be written about and looked at years from now. Massive amount of interaction on this issue in the Hollywood genre. So he's very unusual in that regard. He's a very good friend, been very helpful to me, and his definitive contribution, of course, was the creation of the movie Roswell, which aired on, we showed a perfect introduction to the conference on Friday night. It hit all the right themes. Right? It was a movie. There's some license being taken, but if you watch the movie, all the right themes, the emotional themes, are there. The posture of the government is there. The sense of the time is there. They were scared to death. They were scared to death of the ETs that were turning up. They were scared to death of the Soviet Union's nuclear weapon program and their ballistic missiles program, which was being generated by their German scientists. It seems to me that in some ways it seems like the reason we fought World War II is so we could all get some German scientists who then gave us nuclear tipped missiles, which we then spent $13 trillion on. Interesting issues, interesting times. Paul has dealt with all of this. But Roswell stands, to me, as his kind of crowning achievement in this field. But I'm looking forward to something new from him. He's going to do something really special very soon. I think most of you know that he has a major movie project. It's been in the works for some time with Richard Hoagland, who is obviously speaking here. And if things take off, if disclosure takes place, I see no reason why Paul is going to move right to the forefront and be involved in major projects, because the American people upon disclosure are going to want a ton of information. They're going to want it right now. They're going to want it both factual. They're going to want it in dramatic form. They want to see this issue examined from every single angle. There's only a limited number of people that have real background from the standpoint of producing and directing and putting this issue out than Paul. So he's at the X conference because the fact is, in America, when you track the trajectory of policy, you will find it has a news component, it has an entertainment component, it has a political component. When we get someplace, okay, when we go from A to B, we just don't decide to do it and it's done. We work our way. By the way, Paul, he's not set up yet, right?
Almost.
Almost, okay. We work our way a little through Hollywood, you know? We go through the news media, we get a little feedback, throw some polls, we're a complex society. And so Hollywood plays an incredible role in real policy in America. Perfect example of this. I've had conversations with some people that go roughly like this. How do you think the country's doing? I like it. I like the way things are going. Great. What's the principal reason that you feel that way? I like Jed Bartlett. I love this man. Best president we ever had. Jebediah Bartlett. I point out at that point, well, you understand he is president on a television show. Well, what's the difference? I like him, I like his policies, right? I get a much better look at the presidency on that program. So if Jeb's doing well, I'm happy. Yeah, think about that for a minute before it starts to register exactly what that means, okay? You know what I'm saying? Right? We live in interesting times, and our ability to determine real from unreal and make policy based on what? Opposed reality, actual reality, a surreality? I don't know. It's pretty confusing. Unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of, how would you say, being wrong and having this confusion jump up and bite us. So we've got to have people in the entertainment world, people in the political world, people in the news world getting together and making clear to us what's true, what's not true, what's fiction, what's not fiction, so we can decide what we're really going to do in the real world, because that's really where it counts. Not on West Wing, which I love. I've watched every show, worship the show. But the real world is in fact what counts. We know what happened in 9/11. That was not a television show. Right? They weren't actors. They didn't get to go home at night and cash their check. So Paul has a unique perspective in this regard. And I encourage you to check out his website and see some of the things he's been involved in, because he's going to be doing a lot of things in the future. Now let's see, are we getting close here? Oh, by the way, he has a documentary that's in the works about the sci-fi business, which is fascinating. You're going to be seeing about that pretty soon. All of us, I think most of us, had a pretty substantial connection to sci-fi when we were a child. Isn't that true? For me, I had this series of books. I forget the name of it. It was Tom Swift. Tom Swift books. I was reading those when I was 9. That was it. Okay? I mean, if I don't pick up Tom Swift, I'm not standing here today. I might have picked up, Wuthering Heights, all right? And I'd be teaching English at a girls' school in Montana or something, right? But I picked up Tom Swift, and I said, this is the best stuff I'm ever going to read. Nothing's going to get better than this. Of course, it limited me a little bit, because when I actually had to read Shakespeare in high school, I had no idea what he was saying. There were no rockets. There were no hydroplanes. There was, why am I reading this? Science fiction has done as much to shape American culture as anything, and we don't really fully understand that. We haven't recognized it. We know that some guy will put a movie together and pull in 400 million, but we don't really understand why 400 million. The government wants us to sort of stay in a very blasé place, right? Don't think too hard. Don't think too far out there. Live your life. Pay your taxes. Don't give us a hard time, right? The government doesn't like to think of us as people with vast imaginations who are reaching out there and rethinking things. No. You start rethinking things, the next thing you know, you're living out in the woods, you're not buying anything, the economy goes to hell. You see what I'm talking about? We're still trying to get a grip on the impact of movies and television, science on us. And not a lot of people, not everybody out there is really interested in having us come to the right conclusions about it. Paul is somebody that wants to come to the right conclusion. So he understands sci-fi and a lot of other things. Yes? I will be, by the way, I made an announcement about this on a national press release, but I sort of neglected to tell the conference. It was an oversight because I was sneaking up on you, but I will be giving the keynote speech at the banquet tonight. I'll be talking a little bit about that. I am sufficiently tired after 4 days without sleep that I think I can give a keynote worthy of my innermost needs and desires. Because most of the time I'm awake, sober, and utterly constrained. You know what I'm talking about? You walk down the street. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say, excuse me. Did I bump into you? Oh, sorry. Oh, wow. Put that money in the meter, right? 4 days without sleep. I don't care about the meter. I don't care what's going on. I just walk up to anybody. How you doing? Let's talk, right? You need to, but it's better to do, I've learned it's better to do it that way than through alcohol. When you get really tired and the inhibitions go away, it just gets you into sort of an open, frame of mind. But when you get that way by alcohol, it doesn't work that way. And so instead of being interesting and provocative, you basically just make a complete idiot of yourself. Right? So but this is harder. It's easier to take 6 drinks than it is to stay up for 4 days. Trust me.
Steve, we got it.
You got it?
We're there.
Yeah, right. Okay. They think they've got it, so they want to push me off here. I'll be happy to do
He
it.
should go to Congress because he knows how to filibuster.
By the way. All right. That's it. Paul.
Thank you, Steve.
If anything goes with the AV, it's not my fault. I gotta do some stuff. I'll be back.
He's got to do some stuff. He'll be back. Paul Davids is my name. I'm back home here. I grew up a few miles away. I was a kid in Garrett Park Estates, Kensington. I went to Kensington Junior High School, which I think no longer exists. And then went to, what was the name of our high school, John? Walter Johnson High School. And then on to Princeton. So how did I get involved with this? I was always destined to go to Hollywood. I was never destined to be involved with UFOs. Didn't believe in them, loved them as science fiction. Saw all the science fiction movies that dealt with outer space and UFOs, good and bad. But didn't put any stock in it until 1987, as you're going to see in my presentation, which I call Profiles in Courage on the UFO Issue. And we're going to deal with what I consider to be courage in Hollywood, politics, a little bit of literature, journalism, and among the astronauts. And we're going to heavily lace the beginning of this presentation with things that relate to my personal story, how I got involved and why I got involved. So let's try the PowerPoint. I am the son of a noted scholar of American history. My father, my late father, was Dr. Jules Davids of Georgetown University, who spent 40 years in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. He helped found the School of Foreign Service. And he had secrets of his own. How many of you saw Roswell last night when we showed it? Not everyone, so I want to show you this preview that was made for the main project that I did that was involved with UFOs, the movie Roswell, a Showtime film that was first broadcast in 1994. So this is where I ended up after my years of skepticism, with making a dramatic statement that I think many have concluded is one of the most powerful statements supporting the idea that flying saucers are top secret, that they are extraterrestrial, and the information is being withheld from the public. We lost it. I'm learning to do this, so we'll give it one more try. Go back.
On July 4th, 1947, something crashed in Roswell, New Mexico. It was so unbelievable.
This just in. It's flying high.
There was only one thing the government could do.
I understand. This is a witness. This is what you found.
Kyle McLaughlin,
I'm the fall guy on this. I want to know what for.
Martin Sheen in the Showtime original movie, Roswell.
What if people think that we are not in control of the skies? They'd be right.
One of the several very compelling things that I saw that that motivated me toward wanting to get involved in the film of the Roswell incident was a show on unsolved mysteries that came out a couple of years before my film. And one of those who recounted her story in that Unsolved Mysteries was Sappho Henderson, the widow of an aviator known as Captain Pappy Henderson, who was part of the team at Roswell in 1947. Sappho Henderson mentioned that after decades following the Roswell incident, her husband confided in her that it was a crash of an ET spacecraft, that there were alien bodies involved, and that he was a pilot that flew those bodies to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and that it had been above top secret for many years. But they're seeing an article about it in a tabloid magazine made him think that maybe it wasn't completely top secret anymore and he could tell her about it. Here's what she had to say. I'd like you to see this clip and think about this in terms of the secrecy that she's suggesting.
My husband, Oliver Henderson, otherwise known as Pappy in the Air Force, he was entrusted with many of this country's top secrets, and they were safe with him. He never told anything that he wasn't supposed to. And therefore, it was 34 years after this incident happened that I heard about it.
Captain Pappy Henderson was the man who piloted the plane that took the first pieces of wreckage out of Roswell. In 1981, 2 years before he died, he told his wife that in spite of military denials, the Roswell incident really happened.
My husband told me the bodies were small, smaller than human bodies. The heads were larger, and the eyes were rather sunken and a little slanted. Clothing was of material unlike anything he'd seen before. They were strange. They were not of this earth. When my husband, who was a man of truth, who was trusted with 29 different Army aircraft planes, first pilot, aircraft commander, tells me this story, I believe him.
If this happened, it's the most significant event of the 20th century, probably the millennium. It would be akin to Columbus discovering the New World and Queen Isabella deciding not to tell the rest of the world about the discovery of the New World.
That man is Captain Kevin Randall, who wrote a book called UFO Crash at Roswell, which we used as a basis for the motion picture.
My husband.
How do we move on here now? To begin my story, I said that my father was a scholar of American history. My father, we have a sound problem. Is there anything we can do about what just came on here? We have no control over that? Okay. In 1955, the book Profiles in Courage came out by Senator John F. Kennedy. It won a Pulitzer Prize, and it helped propel JFK to the presidency. It helped secure the nomination for him. The man who wrote the majority of the first draft of Profiles in Courage is shown at the right. That's my father, Dr. Jules Davids, with his manual typewriter. And he wrote the book in our house at 4814 Flanders Avenue in Garrett Park Estates. At the right, you see my father at his graduation from high school. And at the left, you see him from behind at Georgetown University. You see him speaking with Jackie Kennedy, who was one of the students in his class. In his history class, he gave lectures on political courage in American history and the meaning of political courage. And Jackie Kennedy was very impressed by his lectures and took this information to Jack Kennedy, who was contemplating writing a book. To substantiate this, since a lot of people may not be familiar with the fact that Profiles in Courage was largely ghostwritten, not solely by my father, but largely by my father, who wrote 5 of the 9 chapters, the first drafts, which were then revised by Ted Sorensen and others. This was JFK's first letter to my dad in 1955. And this was the letter sent 6 weeks later, March 4th of 1955. Dear Dr. Davids, I was delighted to learn from Ted Sorensen that it would be possible for you to arrange your schedule to assist us in the preparation of the book. I thought your memorandum was excellent and should prove most beneficial. I will be in touch with you, and I will look forward to seeing you in April. Sincerely, John Kennedy.
Can you put that on your left lapel? Thank you very much.
You want it here?
That's good. That's great.
Okay. My father had written a memorandum proposing how the book should be written and that it should concentrate on courageous acts by senators. This was the preface to Profiles in Courage. My father is acknowledged in the 3rd paragraph down, Professor Jules Davids of Georgetown University, assisted materially in the preparation of several chapters. John Kennedy couldn't say that my dad actually wrote those chapters. He accepted the Pulitzer Prize for the book, which you're not allowed to do with a book that you haven't actually written yourself. So the claim was always there that JFK had written this book. Ted Sorensen has always supported him in that. And my father said nothing to the press during the 1960 election when inquiries were made. Drew Pearson called him and was looking for the story. We were Democrats, we were supporters of JFK. My dad didn't want to do anything that might help Richard Nixon win the presidency. And so he didn't reveal his role in this until much later. And this, much later, this was 1980, Walter Scott's Personality Parade. Someone had written a question about the writing of Profiles in Courage. And the answer gave the credit to my father and to Ted Sorensen as the principal writers. These were 4 of the senators that my dad dealt with in his chapters: Daniel Webster, Sam Houston, Lucius Lamar, and George Norris, most of them around the time of the Civil War, one of them at the time of World War I. And what the point was of all of this is that occasionally in American history, you find acts of outstanding courage by people in public life, by senators, where an action they take, a position they take, is contrary to their own personal interests, contrary to the interests of their state, contrary to the interests of the constituents that elected them, and yet they take a position for what they perceive as the larger good of the country. And that's what Profiles in Courage was. It was examples. One of the points I want to make today is that on the issue of the UFO and ET contact, there have been precious few examples of courage, in my opinion, by anyone in public life, by anyone in politics, by anyone in the Senate and the Congress. There have been a few exceptions. I can think of about 4 that I'll get to in the course of the talk. And I guess part of the reason depends upon how you define what constitutes courage on this issue. Because I think for decades, a lot of people felt that the courageous thing to do was to remain silent on it, because that was the patriotic thing to do. If a matter is classified, it isn't necessarily considered an act of courage to break classification. You're breaking the law. You can't do that. You're constricted by the system. And yet, how does it get determined that something this big and this important is classified and the public has no need or no right to know it. And so with the passage of time and so many decades, courage, I think, becomes the flip side of that original perception. Who has the courage, the guts, to break with the traditions, to break with what's prevailing and accepted of them, and to either outright tell the public the truth, as some people have done in public life, and have gotten very little attention for it in the media, as we know, or at least to drop the hints to the public so they can begin to put the pieces together themselves. This was Kennedy's letter to my dad thanking him for his help in writing the book, 1956. And these 2 pages were from my father's essay that he wrote for JFK on the meaning of political courage. Now, this was revised and changed for the actual book publication. But there's a couple of points in this opening that I think bear upon the issue that we're also interested in. And I wanted to point out my father's point of view about it, at least in the mid-1950s. He talks about how societies deal, large societies like the USSR and the US, deal with factions. A faction within. The culture is a sort of a subculture that doesn't go along with the prevailing norms, that has its own agenda, that has its own point of view, that may upset the status quo, that may be seen as a threat. And I think you could call the UFO community and advocates for disclosure a faction within US society. They're an advocacy group, and from the point of view of some in government, they're seen as a problem. My dad here was talking about historically how societies deal with factions, and he said that the USSR, the communist society, dealt with factions by destroying liberty. There was no liberty to meet as a UFO group for so many years in the USSR. They wouldn't let you gather. They wouldn't let you hold a meeting. They nipped it in the bud. In the United States, the prevailing way of dealing with it has been an inclination by the government and the media to create conformity. Conformity of behavior, of point of view. Don't forget, this was written in the 50s. By giving every citizen the same opinions, the same passions, the same interests. And this is what we've seen in the official denials on UFOs, the ridicule, the ostracizing of witnesses, basically the attempt to discredit the faction and create a prevailing opinion in which everybody knows there's no such thing as UFOs. There's nothing to cover up. Why would they classify any of this? It never happened. It's all a hoax. None of the witnesses are telling the truth and can be relied upon. Or people are making honest mistakes. These are all their claims. They've investigated it. They had their conduct committee. They've looked at thousands of cases. Nothing to it. And for decades, most of the public accepted this, either blindly or questioningly. But things have begun to change after 50 years, and that's where we've seen the incredible UFO activism of the last decade, or 15 years, both in the media and creeping into government, creeping into society as a whole, so that now that you have polls that show that the majority of people in the US do believe that there's something to this. They do believe UFOs exist, that they're extraterrestrial visitations. Turning now to some of the personal dimensions of my story as to how I ended up producing Roswell, what was going on for me, what was going on for my dad. My dad, as I say, was teaching at Georgetown, and one of his next famous students, or soon, someday to be famous, was young Bill Clinton. He had taught Jackie Kennedy. That's Bill Clinton at about the time he was in my dad's class. I left the East Coast after graduating Princeton and went to Hollywood. I had always wanted to produce films. I was very interested in animation, very interested in special effects, and writing, and directing. So I went from Princeton to the American Film Institute Center for Advanced Film Studies, which was then in Beverly Hills. And in the 1970s, I broke into the film business, starting in a small way, working for great men. Paul Kohner was a very famous agent, and I began with him as a script reader for Charles Bronson. John Huston was one of his clients, Max von Sydow, Ingmar Bergman, William Wyler, who I also worked for at that time. I met George Powell, who had me write a version of The Hobbit. We were turned down everywhere. In those days, they weren't interested in anything having to do with Middle-earth. I also worked for F. Lee Bailey. My first producing was as a segment producer for around $500 or $600 a week, working 7 days a week on a television show called Lie Detector, where people with a claim or a story were wired up to a polygraph and tested by a polygrapher named Ed Gelb. And basically, F. Lee Bailey confronted these people on the air and told them whether they were telling the truth or fabricating. Turned out that Betty Hill was one of the people on the show. I didn't bring her on. And in those days, in the early 80s, I wasn't even much interested. I look back at it and say, my God, Betty Hill was there in the studio. I didn't even much care about meeting her. She passed her polygraph, which really surprised me, but I just had no interest. I went from that show to working on the Transformers, which I think either you or your kids will have seen and remembered, based on the Hasbro toys, the robots, the Autobots and Decepticons that change into boats and planes and space shuttles. I was a production coordinator for 80 shows. Most of them are now available on DVD from Rhino. And I wrote a few of those shows. And when my work on that series was done, then came one of the most fateful days in my life, February 25th, 1987, 4:30 in the afternoon. My daughter, Jordan, she was then 9 years old. My son Scott was 6. Jordan screamed at me from the second floor of our house, "Daddy, get upstairs right now. I see a flying saucer." And I was a little bit slow to react. I had been interrupted already. I didn't want to be interrupted again. I was sure whatever she was saying had to be a Goodyear blimp or something like that. And I asked her, "Take another look. Isn't it a Goodyear blimp?" And she just screamed, "No, Daddy, I mean it. Get up here right now. I see a flying saucer. Get up here." I didn't even take the camera up. I didn't expect anything. But I saw that flying saucer. I saw it descend from the sky, from the window of her room. I stepped out onto the roof with my 2 children, and for about 4 to 5 minutes, I'm estimating, I watched a domed disc approach the house, perch and hover between the 2 trees in front of my house. It wobbled a little bit when it hovered. It moved laterally. I saw it from 3 angles. At first I was looking up at it. It was high above us. And then it descended from that position as it went to the left, and I saw it just about level. And at that point, I don't think it was more than a few hundred feet away from me. I mean, it was at one point over the road in front of our house. And then it descended out across the valley where we are, and I watched it travel for probably about a half a mile, and then it was just gone. Just gone. I couldn't see where it went. I didn't believe in things disappearing. I knew it was a real physical object. You could see the sun, you know, reflecting its late afternoon orange off the rim of this thing. Behaved strangely. You know, they talk about anti-gravitation. Well, it seemed to be sort of repulsing the ground, and it was like sort of like a boat might float on water a little bit. There was even one point where the underside of the craft got completely black, and then turned silver again. I saw a sort of a shimmer around it, like you're driving down a desert road in the heat and you see heat waves on a road. I saw all these things, and the effect it had on me was so profound, because in 5 minutes, I knew that this subject that I had debunked, that this whole idea of the existence of domed discs that fly in our skies wasn't fiction, that they really exist. And it opened up 1,000 questions for me, and I'm a very curious person. I think within the next 6 months, I must have read a couple of hundred books on UFOs. I spent the whole summer by the swimming pool with a stack of like 8 different UFO books every single day. And I just read them all from cover to cover, one after the next, after the next. And I found something strange for me, that I suddenly had a photographic memory for these books, for these cases. I absorbed it all as sort of an encyclopedic knowledge, where I could remember the dates these incidents happened, the witnesses, what the debunkers said, what the circumstances were. And I could suddenly spout this out, whereas I couldn't remember, lots of other kinds of things in detail. Suddenly I became an expert in ufology in 6 months. I had never read a book ever before that said that UFOs were real. Never saw Kehoe's books, any of it. It all passed me by. This, at the right, was the report written up on my sighting for the Center for UFO Studies. At the left, when International UFO Reporter did an article about my sighting, that was the cover. These were my notes when I saw the saucer. And I wrote down everything I could remember about what I saw, that it was silent, that it was silver at the top and bottom, that it had no wings, absolutely round disc. As far as size, I estimated 10 to 20 feet in diameter. I had seen helicopters fly over my valley all the time. I didn't think it was quite as big as a helicopter, but I thought it was larger. Well, it may have been about the size of a Volkswagen or a little larger. It was a little hard to tell, but it was small. It wasn't the sort of craft that would have room for a bunch of Earth visitors who were being abducted. But there did seem to be a sort of interaction with it by where it perched and hovered through the trees in the spots where we could see it directly, and it wasn't concealed by leaves. This was a drawing that this was by my son, 6 years old. He did those squiggly lines because to show that it sort of wobbled a little bit as it hovered. And this is what my son had to say about it when he was 6 years old. If I can find the cursor. Ah, there it is. Okay, let's try.
Well, I was downstairs playing video, and Jordan, my sister Jordan, shouted out to me and my dad, "Scott, Dad, I see a flying saucer." And so we ran upstairs, and we watched it a tiny bit in here. And then we climbed out on the roof, and we looked at it for 2 to 3 minutes. And it was a medium size, and it had a dome on top, sort of like Saturn, but no dome on the bottom. And it was a strange object, something that I've never seen before. There was no noise. It couldn't be a balloon, couldn't be a helicopter, it couldn't be an airplane, it couldn't be a train. It was just a strange object.
Naturally, it couldn't have been a train. That was young Scott. Let's find this cursor so we can get it right. That was my daughter's drawing of the saucer with the three of us out on our roof, outside her window. Well, what else was happening at about that time? It was actually a month or so after that Bill Clinton wrote his first letter to my dad since he'd been a student about seeing my dad in the Georgetown University report and thanking him for having been such a wonderful professor. He was then the governor of Arkansas. This is important because it leads up to contacts I had with Bill Clinton about UFOs when he was president. So I'm going to build the case for you here step by step. After my sighting, I talked to a lot of people about it. I talked to an engineer from Jet Propulsion Lab who had worked on the Mars Mariner project, I believe it was. And one of the people I talked to was Robert Wise, the director of The Day the Earth Stood Still, who had become a family friend. And he took the subject very seriously. He had come to feel that there was a great deal of credibility to it because after he had made the movie, a lot of people with scientific background had come to him and told him about specific cases. And the reputations of these people persuaded him that there was really something to this. And he couldn't understand the reason that it might be covered up. But he didn't think that was right. I'm going to skip a few of the clips because we're a little shorter for time than I hope we did. I've got a long presentation, a long way to go. We may be close to 5 when we finish. If that's going to be okay, we'll make sure you can get to Richard Hoagland. Robert Wise recommended that I talk to his friend Roy Thinnis, the actor, who was the star of The Invaders. Roy Thinnis played David Vincent, an investigator of UFOs, in this very popular series. And like Robert Wise, Roy Thinnis had come to take UFOs very seriously. And Roy came out to my house, brought a lot of UFO books for me, including one I absolutely love called Clear Intent by Fawcett and Greenwood. And he talked to me about the case, and he wrote this letter on July 13th of '87 to Don Schmidt at the Center for UFO Studies in Chicago. Don was at that time the director of special investigations. It was the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies. This is a picture of me and Roy actually last year in Roswell. We've been friends through the years. Now, Don Schmidt came out to my house in '87 while he was investigating the MJ-12 papers. And he did his own study of our case. And he later introduced me to Captain Kevin Randall, who he was planning on collaborating with, co-authoring a book about the Roswell incident. They were at that time investigating, interviewing a lot of the Roswell witnesses. And it was in 1989, December of 1989, we made a deal together for $25. I optioned their book that hadn't been written yet. It was a 17-page outline. And I said, look, I didn't want to spend a lot of money on this. They would get paid well if I could get it set up with a network or a studio. But I wanted to have the rights to their work, what they were doing, up until such time as they got the book published. And I held it for years for this $25. And then eventually, this just shows that during the years I was trying to get Roswell going, and it was being rejected everywhere in Hollywood. I mean, I don't think there was a single studio or production company that didn't turn it down. I must have had 70 meetings on it. I've got dozens of rejection letters for all kinds of reasons. No one would be interested in this. No one will believe it. If we do it and it's shown to be a hoax, we'll have egg on our face. If this had happened, I would have heard of it. Why do you think the public would be interested in this? We can't do a UFO movie and claim that it's actually true or based on fact. We're interested in fiction. People want science fiction. They don't want to be told that their government is covering something up. I heard it all for years. It was deafening. During those years, I was supporting myself with a contract from Lucasfilm to write 6 Star Wars books for young readers. And those are 2 of them. And this was the first letter I received from Bill Clinton. It was in response to a letter I wrote to him supporting his candidacy. Very nice letter in which he congratulated me on the Star Wars books, said he'd like to read them, and he was glad to hear from Dr. Jules Davids' family. This is another letter, actually, he wrote to me after he was elected president. I had sent him the Star Wars books. So in December, after the election, before he was president-elect, he thanked me for the books and a photograph I had sent him of my dad and mom and myself in Williamsburg. So eventually, Roswell, the movie, was made. I spoke a lot about this last night, so I won't dwell on it very long, but I just want to say that the first key to getting it made was when I brought in, formed a partnership with director Jeremy Kagan, an excellent director I had gone to school with at the AFI. Jeremy directed The Chosen, the movie based on the Chaim Potak book. He directed a film with Henry Winkler called Heroes. The Journey of Natty Gann was a Disney film he'd done. I guess he'd probably done about 6 features and at least as many television movies, 1 or 2 of them for HBO. He set up a deal for this project at HBO where we were in development for about a year and a half, and 8 drafts of screenplay were written. And last night I told the story about how our movie was canceled at the last minute because they decided to do another UFO film instead. And it was The Attack of the 50-Foot Woman with Daryl Hannah. I never had such a disappointing day in my life as the day I got that news they were dropping our project. But if I could have just seen around the corner 6 months ahead, I wouldn't have been so depressed, because we went out and we got Showtime interested in it. And of the 8 drafts, they said, which one do you want to do, Paul? Which one did you like the best? And I said, well, it's draft number 5, because for me, HBO was ruining it with drafts 6, 7, and 8, where they changed the whole emphasis. And they said, let's do draft number 5. So we put it out to Kyle MacLachlan to star in it. And when Kyle MacLachlan said he was interested, the day that Business Affairs at Showtime made a deal memo with Kyle MacLachlan was the day that they greenlighted the movie. And I think it was a Wednesday, and I got a phone call saying, here's where you report to work on Monday. You got 10 days to hire your whole staff. So we hired 100 people the next 10 days. We were approved for a budget of close to $6 million. It's a lot for a television movie at that time. And that was about $1.3 million or $1.4 million more than HBO was ever willing to give us to do it. So it worked out really well. After our movie came out, the brouhaha escalated in Washington. And the timing of the release of our movie coincided very neatly with the release of the Air Force's report declaring that there was no saucer at Roswell. It was a Mogul research balloon. And when President Clinton was in Ireland, some schoolboy asked him a question at a press conference whether the aliens had really crashed at Roswell. I'm going to show you the answer he gave, as shown on ABC News. But his answer was chopped in half. They didn't broadcast the second half of it. Oh, gosh, I passed it again. Let's just say his full statement was, as far as I know, an alien spaceship did not crash in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. But if it did, and if alien bodies were recovered, the Air Force hadn't told me about it, and I would like to know. Now, they didn't broadcast the second half of his statement, although they reported it in the news on television. They cut it off after he said it didn't crash in Roswell in 1947, and all the crowd laughs. They, roar with laughter. So knowing that the president had said that if it did happen, the Air Force hadn't told him, he'd like to know, I said, time to write him another letter. He'd like to know, I'm going to presume to tell him at least what I know. And That's when I wrote him this a two-page letter in which I sent him the movie Roswell. I sent him several documentaries I had made about the Roswell incident. One was called Down in Roswell. Another was called Reply to the Air Force Report on the Roswell Incident. Another was called Golden Anniversary UFO Briefing for the White Sands Missile Range Pioneers. I had been invited to give a talk down in White Sands on the 50th anniversary of the Missile Range Pioneers. I sent him a copy of the book UFO Crash at Roswell, and I asked him to please consider declassifying this, as he had made bold moves to declassify other things. And I listed some of those things that he had done, made those declassifications. Oh, I also sent him this. The New York Daily News had published a picture of the alien from our movie with Bill Clinton at the right and Lawrence Rockefeller at the left. I thought he'd find it amusing, but Lawrence Rockefeller at that time was undertaking, he was underwriting the compilation of an updated study about UFOs to distribute to all members of Congress. It was a very bold gesture on his part. On March 20th, 1996, this was about 6 weeks after I sent the letter, about 2 months later, I get a personal letter from the White House. Dear Paul, thanks for the video cassettes. You were kind to pass them along, and I am grateful for your generosity and thoughtfulness. Hillary joins me in sending best wishes. He said nothing about the case, but it was interesting that he thanked me and appreciated my generosity for sending him these seditious materials that accused the government of a massive cover-up for 50 years. I thought the timing of the letter was also interesting. There was a coincidence here, and I don't know if it was a coincidence, but the letter was written at the White House the day before Richard Hoagland gave a press briefing in Washington accusing NASA of a cover-up of the discovery of extraterrestrial structures on the moon. The President wrote the letter the day before that widely publicized press conference and mailed it from the White House by overnight priority mail the day after the press conference. So we're talking about profiles in UFO courage. Here's Richard Hoagland for his press conference. I thought it took a lot of bravery to stand before the Washington Press Corps and make those pronouncements. He was ridiculed in the press. He was castigated in the Washington Post. He was supported only by this reporter, Sarah McClendon, at that time a fixture in Washington with her Washington Report. She was the only one that stood by him and felt he had raised genuine scientific issues that the press had no business ridiculing, that they were legitimate issues. Here's another man who showed some courage during all of that. Webster Hubbell, #3 man at the Justice Department, who was under indictment in the Watergate matter, who revealed that when he was sent over to justice by President Clinton, Bill Clinton asked him to do two things: to find out for him over there who killed JFK and answer the question, are there UFOs? Just the very fact that he released this subjected him to ridicule. And there were a lot of people that ridiculed Bill Clinton over it, that he could have even asked the question, are there UFOs, when obviously it was proven in 1968 or 1969 by the Condon Committee that there aren't any. Here's Lawrence Rockefeller, an example of profiles in UFO courage for the study that he financed and distributed to all members of Congress, which brought renewed credibility to the UFO issue during the Clinton presidency, and asked everyone in the Congress and Senate to take a look at the seriousness of a number of these cases. Some people at the Fund for UFO Research were instrumental in helping with the writing and research of this paper. Now, this coincided approximately with the Air Force offering its explanation for the aliens that were seen at Roswell as having been crash dummies from tests that were done much, much later. One of the reasons I showed you the clip of Sappho Henderson at the beginning, when she talked about her husband, Captain Pappy Henderson, having seen the alien bodies and having transported them to Wright-Patterson. Well, he wasn't talking about crash dummies. And the only way this crash dummy report works is if you ignore the testimony of witness after witness after witness, credible people, military people, people with substance behind them. And if you can just brush them all away and ignore them all, then you can say it was crash dummies and the case is closed and you'll never address the issue again. Done deal. That's what we've seen. But it's the testimony of the witnesses that made such a great impression on me. I know how I was ridiculed even for my UFO sighting. It's the lot in life and the fate of those who come forward to report what they really have seen and just try to tell the truth. I applaud Sam Donaldson for having been a great skeptic of the crash dummy report. He didn't buy it. He's a graduate of the military academy in Roswell, New Mexico. And he said to the Pentagon, "Do you really expect the American people to believe this?" John Podesta, who was chief of staff for Bill Clinton, after he left the White House, began to become outspoken on the UFO issue and helpful in seeking declassification of documents on certain cases. He didn't do it when he was in the White House, but when he was out, he actually assisted people at the Sci-Fi Channel who were doing a number of documentaries. One of them was on the Kecksburg case. Anyway, he put his name and his reputation behind this, and in Washington, that takes courage. Congressman Stephen Schiff, one of the few in Congress who ever touched this. The one before Stephen Schiff who touched it was Congressman Gerald Ford. Back in the days of the Michigan flap, I think it was in about 1965, mid-1960s. This was when J. Allen Hynek, then consultant for the Air Force, came in and declared that swamp gas would be the explanation for the flying saucer sightings in Michigan. Nobody bought that, and Gerald Ford at that time called for an investigation. And unfortunately, the investigation became the Condon Committee inquiry out of the University of Colorado, which has been shown to have been a whitewash where the conclusions were rather predetermined. And also, unfortunately, Gerald Ford, when he became president of the United States, never had another word to say about it. Interesting how his curiosity was assuaged. Maybe he believed the Condon Committee report. But here we have another Republican, Stephen Schiff, congressman of New Mexico, who around the time that our movie hit the airwaves, well, actually, he began it while we were making the movie, his inquiry looking for documents about the Roswell incident. He died young. He died a few years later, unexpectedly, of some very fast-acting skin cancer, I think it was. Shocked everyone. But he fought to get the information on this, and I think the main outcome of his effort was that we learned that all the outgoing messages from the Roswell base in 1947, from this period of time, were all destroyed without authorization within a year or two of the incident. Now, of course, we don't really know that they were destroyed. They may have been moved to, alongside that the box in that warehouse that has the what was it, the Ark of the Covenant from Raiders of the Lost Ark? Who knows? But interestingly, the government still had troop deployment data and original orders and papers from World War I, from 1917. That hadn't been destroyed without authorization. Those were some of the papers that Bill Clinton actually had declassified. Here was the news report on the Schiff investigation. Let's see if we can get this.
People have demanded answers and have received very little. Congressman Steve Schiff wanted to change that. He asked the Defense Department for its records, and they referred him to the National Archives, where librarians say they have absolutely nothing on the Roswell incident.
Get the complete runaround by the Defense Department to be referred to an agency that's supposed to have the documents, and they don't have the documents, is something I've just never experienced before. But even if this all proves to be routine and explainable, this is just an example of how government raises suspicions and rumors among the public by how they themselves handle things.
Schiff now has a federal agency, the General Accounting Office, looking for documents. He says if the search turns up nothing, they'll continue the investigation, probably through the House Armed Services Committee. Stuart Dyson, News 4, Albuquerque.
Barry Goldwater. Here's the third Republican. Why is it always the Republicans who are deserving of the UFO courage acknowledgement? It was remarkable that he ran for president against Lyndon Johnson in '64 and lost, but while he was serving the Senate afterwards, wrote several letters to constituents acknowledging his interest in the Roswell incident and his belief in its credibility and how his own effort to get to the bottom of it had been thwarted. Larry King broadcast this statement from Senator Barry Goldwater. I think he was no longer in the Senate at the time he said this.
I can't back that up, but I think that at Wright Patterson Field, if you could get into certain places, you'd find out what the Air Force and the government knows about UFOs.
From his ham radio shack outside Phoenix, the senator disclaims direct knowledge of UFOs, but he does confirm a disturbing story about an exchange with General Curtis LeMay.
Reportedly, a spaceship landed, and it was all hushed up, quieted, and nobody had never heard about much of it. I called Curtis LeMay and I said, General, I know we have a room at Wright-Patterson where you put all this secret stuff. Could I go in there? I've never heard him get mad, but he got madder than hell at me, cussed me out, said, don't ever ask me that question again.
I acknowledge Larry King for having broadcast not only this, not only his report from Area 51, but so many times having advocates of UFO reality and UFO disclosure on CNN, on his show. George Knapp also did a report that covered Barry Goldwater. In the interest of time, I won't show this to you now. It covers the same ground that you just saw. Here's one that's a surprise. Michael Eisner, the head of the Walt Disney Company. They were opening a new ride at Disney World called Alien Encounters. And Michael Eisner commissioned the making of a documentary about UFOs called Alien Encounters, which was one of the most hard-hitting documentaries on UFOs I've ever seen. It was so hard-hitting, they must have decided that it was too hot to be announced as a Disney show and shown across the whole country. They ended up showing this in about 5 US cities, unannounced, at very weird times, like suddenly it came on at 3 in the morning in Milwaukee. And that was all it ever broadcast. But it was enough to get it out, as we say in the business, virally. Here was his introduction to the show about the UFO cover-up, sponsored by Disney.
Tonight we celebrate the new Tomorrowland at Walt Disney World in Florida with a television special that's out of this world. Hello, Michael Eisner, head of the Walt Disney Company. In a top-secret military installation somewhere in the United States, there are those who believe that the government is hiding the remains of an alien spacecraft that mysteriously crashed to Earth. With more and more scientific evidence of alien encounters and UFO sightings, the idea of creatures from another planet might not be as far-fetched as we once thought. In fact, one of you out there could have the next alien encounter. Enjoy tonight's special. I'm going to walk over and see if I can sneak a peek. Maybe not.
Robert Urich hosted the show. I applaud him for that. And he really let the establishment have it in, well, we're not working now. Let's see, there it is. I think we have time to see one of the clips from the show. Let's see this one.
Mankind has the unique ability to ignore the obvious, especially when the facts reveal a disturbing truth. We once believed the sun revolved around the earth. When Galileo demonstrated the reverse is true in 1634, he was charged with heresy and placed under house arrest for the last 8 years of his life. The charges were later dropped, 342 years later. Now as we approach a new millennium, mankind is in the midst of the most profound event in history, actual contact with intelligent life from other planets. For nearly 50 years, officials have been documenting routine alien encounters here on Earth. And thousands of people have seen or experienced this alien presence. Yet many others still refuse to acknowledge the obvious evidence all around them.
The attitude and point of view taken in this show was that disclosure is imminent. And of course, unfortunately, it wasn't. Here's an example of UFO courage that I mentioned last night. Jackie Gleason was a friend of President Richard Nixon and a great supporter of the president. They used to play golf together. And Jackie Gleason has personally reported, he's deceased now, but he did personally report to a number of high-ranking people in my business that Richard Nixon took him to see the remains of alien bodies recovered from a UFO crash. He was shown this after a golf game. And he was taken, they were playing in Florida, and he was taken by the president to MacDill Air Force Base and was shown these alien corpses in a space research medical facility that was top secret. This shook him up. It had a profound effect on his life. He was never the same man after that. And his widow talked about this and about the vast collection of UFO books that he assembled after this happened. I applaud Bob Pratt from the National Enquirer, one of the few newspapers that did regularly report on UFOs, and his reporting was accurate. He wrote the first interview with Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer of the Roswell case, thereby making Roswell known to the public, and that there were witnesses to it who were there, who were claiming cover-up for the first time. He also accurately reported on some of the instances of UFO surveillance of various military bases that have been confirmed in documents that have been released that are available in the literature. Another reporter, Billy Cox, has been at the forefront of exposing this issue, but in Florida today, you don't get these reports in the New York Times. You don't get them in the Washington Post. In Florida today, he was the first to talk to Edgar Mitchell about UFOs. Edgar Mitchell, one of the astronauts who walked on the moon, said that they're real, the aliens are here, and the government didn't tell us astronauts about it before I went to the moon. And he made statements that could almost taken to be charges, claiming that this was criminal negligence on the part of the government to not give them this information before he took his lunar trip. Have you read that in the New York Times? Have you read it in the Washington Post? It's an accurate quote. There's Edgar Mitchell. At the time of the 50th anniversary of the Roswell event, my picture was in Time magazine there, connected with my movie, which was resoundingly debunked. New York Times, Time magazine, and other major national magazines said, of course there were no aliens at Roswell, and the mogul balloon explained it all. I'm going to skip the news broadcast that Tom Brokaw gave at that time, stating it was a mogul balloon. But I do want you to hear what Gordon Cooper says. Gordon Cooper, an astronaut who had the right stuff, who was one of the original Mercury 7, who was a national hero. Could I see a show of hands? How many of you have ever seen Gordon Cooper claiming that there are extraterrestrial spacecraft? Just 3 of you, all right? This will be a treat.
In the late 1950s, America entered the space race. NASA selected 7 test pilots to become the first astronauts in history. Major Gordon Cooper was one of the men chosen for the Mercury space program. His historic flight aboard Faith 7 lasted a record 34 hours, and he became the first man in history to orbit the planet 22 times. Astronaut Gordon Cooper returned to Earth as a true American hero.
All I can say is that it certainly is a great honor to be invited here and to be presented this award. And thank you all very much.
Before Gordon Cooper entered the space program, he had his own encounter with a different type of space traveler. While flying over Central Europe, his fighter squadron came upon a formation of UFOs.
There were a number of extraterrestrial vehicles out there cruising around, flying the same kind of formation we fly in our fighters. They didn't have wings, they were saucer shaped, and we never could get as high or as fast as they were, so really positively identifying them, but they were metallic looking and soft.
Stop at a moment. Can somebody turn this down? I think it's so loud it's distorting. Did you hear him discuss the extraterrestrial vehicles that were up there floating around? You did. Okay, I think we're a little too loud on this, though. If there's...
And they did even though we couldn't live in there, like this horizontal displacement that I was laughing and keep flying along, just move over laughing.
Gordon Cooper's UFO sighting wasn't his only close encounter. In 1958, he was working as a project manager at Edwards Air Force Base in California.
I had a film crew working for me on a project I was doing with the precision landing system on the Edwards Lake game. And they were filming the various stages of the installation. And on a small saucer that we flew overhead and put down some landing gear and landed down on the Lake there on about 50 yards around.
That's a simulation of what happened.
These were old pro cameramen who were used to flying in all kinds of areas, take all kinds of pictures. And they picked up their cameras and started over toward it. And we get some close-ups. And we looked at it, lifted up, put the gear back in, and at a very high rate of speed disappeared. So they came in and told me what happened. I told them to get over to the lab and drop the film immediately. And I would go and look in the book, regulation book, and see what you're supposed to do, who you have to draw to report these kind of incidents, which I did. And finally got back with the film, there was a higher and higher and higher ranked man who seemed to laugh and assuring me that I had to get those negatives into a pouch, that they had made arrangements already to get our commanding general this airplane and go and take the film to Washington.
In an effort to organize open investigations of UFO sightings, Gordon Cooper wrote a letter to the United Nations in 1976, appealing for assistance. His letter stated these are extraterrestrial vehicles visiting from other planets.
They were presented at the council and certainly made a lot of people aware of a number of things that perhaps they had not been aware of before, so maybe it opened the eye.
Today, at age 76, Gordon Cooper reflects upon his experiences.
This universe is limitless and tremendous big universe, and what kind of dream to think that we're the only ones that exist here. I think we'll find that there are probably hundreds of other planets that are habitated, and that there are all levels of civilization. Some may at the same level we are, others that may be thousands and millions of years ahead of us in development.
Have you got Barry Goldwater telling you that the extraterrestrials are real. Edgar Mitchell, who's been to the moon. Astronaut Gordon Cooper, one of the Mercury 7. What does it take to get your government to acknowledge that this is true and not fiction? What does it take? I want to acknowledge Philip Corso for his book, The Day After Roswell. He worked in the White House, part of the National Security Council under Eisenhower, and he claimed to have not only seen one of the alien bodies, but to have worked with some of the debris from the ET crash at Roswell and having disseminated those materials into industry when he was working at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the Foreign Technology Division. He was resoundingly debunked when his book came out. Let's acknowledge Leslie Kean, reporter writing for the Boston Globe. She was the only reporter in the United States to report on the release of the Cometa report from France, which other speakers have mentioned. A defense analysis of the implications of UFO visitation to Earth released by the French, representing French generals, major defense thinkers from France, and there was only one newspaper in the United States that thought that it was news, and that was the Boston Globe. I hope this is beginning to sink in. What kind of a mire we are in here? What kind of a sort of a news blackout? Sir, I'd like to take your question a little later, if I may. I'm trying to speed through. There's more ground to cover than I have time. Bryant Gumbel took a courageous step in terms of his career by hosting 3 dramatic documentaries for the Sci-Fi Channel. I want to mention Donald Schmitt, co-author of UFO Crash at Roswell. He was involved in having this plaque placed at the debris field in Roswell in honor of whoever crashed there. And that plaque, I was there for the dedication in July 5th, 2003. In the time I have left, I think we could maybe go for about another 15 minutes before I'll release you to run over to Richard Hoagland if that's where you're heading. I want to talk about courage in literature and out of Hollywood. And I'll pass through this a little more quickly than I intended. We start with Jules Verne with his From the Earth to the Moon. He mentioned moon beings in the book, but never described them. It was mainly speculation about their existence. And H.G. Wells, who wrote not only War of the Worlds, but also The First Men in the Moon. His speculation that the Earth was being coldly, calculatingly watched by beings from the planet Mars became the Orson Welles radio production of 1938. And that had a profound effect in showing us the sociological effect of panicking the public on this issue. It was a disastrous moment for ufology. George Knapp deserves applause as one of the reporters who has been at the forefront. I have a clip here I'm not going to show at this moment where he talks about the importance of the broadcast of War of the Worlds. From Hollywood in the 1950s came many low-budget science fiction films that are important because of the ideas that they injected into the popular culture. You see here the posters of Earth versus the Flying Saucers and Ray Bradbury's It Came from Outer Space. George Powell was a very important producer of that time who brought us Destination Moon in the late 1940s, 20 years before we actually went. He showed very much the way it would be done. He did it again in Conquest of Space, which included a space station and the first journey to Mars, When Worlds Collide, and he produced the film of the War of the Worlds. Great producer who I knew personally. He was the one that I wrote, the Hobbit movie for that I was telling you about earlier. Rod Serling didn't just serve as head writer and creator and host of The Twilight Zone, but he also hosted an important UFO documentary, UFOs Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, in which he showed a dramatization of a landing of aliens at Holloman Air Force Base. The important thing about what he said in terms of that dramatization was that he was about to show you something that might happen in the future or might already have happened. And there are a lot of claims in the UFO field, as we know, that there was such a landing at Holloman Air Force Base, that it was the basis in our movie Roswell. We had Martin Sheen saying it was the basis for the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And in the documentary that was made, written by Robert Emeninger, that Rod Serling hosted, they had 8 seconds of a strange object coming down the mountains toward Holloman Air Force Base, and it was claimed by one of the Air Force audiovisual specialists, Paul Shartle, that 8 seconds was actually real footage of the alien landing when it did happen at Holloman. I can't confirm it, but again, I'm giving you the background of all the testimony there is about this. Leonard Nimoy, not only for Star Trek, and let's mention Gene Roddenberry, but also Leonard Nimoy hosted the In Search Of show that was the first to bring us it may not have been the first, but it did bring us this testimony of Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer from Roswell. I'd like you to hear this.
When I saw, I couldn't believe there was so much of it. It was scattered over such a vast area. So we proceeded to pick up as much of the debris as we could, load it in a wagon. It was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of. Because I was being an intelligence officer, I was familiar with just about all materials used in aircraft and our air travel. This is nothing like that.
The man who was there said it was nothing from this earth. I don't think he would have agreed that it was the radar target remains of a Project Mogul balloon, all of the materials of which were conventional, including balsa wood, which would have been readily identifiable. We acknowledge Jesse Marcel. We acknowledge Major Donald Kehoe, a great writer, early writer of UFO books, including his The Flying Saucers Are Real, which was listed as the basis for Earth versus the Flying Saucers. He, along with Dr. James McDonald, vociferously protested the conclusions of the Condon Committee. That Condon Committee, their conclusions resulted in the National Academy of Sciences pronouncing that no further scientific study of UFOs was warranted, and the closure of Project Blue Book. And those findings have been used for an excuse now for decades as to why the government won't pay attention. As a matter of fact, when there was a huge flap involving UFOs in Iran, when Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State, and people barraged him with questions about it, his answer was, the issue of UFOs was studied by the Condon Committee back in 1969. They came to the conclusion there was nothing to it. I don't think I have anything further to say on the subject. Some of the science fiction movies that had some fact behind the fiction. The original movie of The Thing, not the remake, but Howard Hawks' movie, 1950, I believe it was, 3 years after the Roswell incident, told the story of the crash of a flying saucer, but set it not in the desert, but in the Arctic. It was a sort of parable for the Roswell story 3 years after it happened. It took courage to get it made. Frank Scully was a Daily Variety reporter. He wrote Behind the Flying Saucers, again, early 1950s, the first book to claim that the US had recovered a downed saucer with alien occupants. There was an immense debunking campaign run against Scully and his sources, and he was ridiculed to death. I want to mention Ray Harryhausen, who brought you First Men in the Moon, based on H.G. Wells, showed structures on the moon, the concept that there had been civilization on the moon. He also brought you Earth versus the Flying Saucers. Here he's pictured with producer George Powell of War of the Worlds. He also brought you this alien from 20 million miles to Earth. William Cameron Menzies did a number of important pictures. He did The Thief of Baghdad, directed it. He directed Things to Come. Invaders from Mars, his science fiction film in the 1950s, was important because it was the first to introduce the idea of alien implants, needles implanting things into the neck which control the behavior of humans, done by aliens. I think that's the first time you'll have seen that concept. Frank Edwards, of radio fame, wrote many books about UFOs. This was a terrible film, Killers from Space. It was by Billy Wilder's brother, Billy Wilder, the great comedy director, who said his brother should have stayed in the leather business. But Killers from Space, with its aliens with ping pong ball eyes, had the themes of alien abduction to an underground base with implants, surgical implants in the body, and hypnotic regression used to recover the memories that had been wiped out of the traumatic alien abduction. A lot of sophisticated ufological ideas introduced in a dime movie that, in a sense, turned it into ridicule, but it introduced the ideas to the public for the first time. Ward Kimball, one of Disney's great animators, worked on all the early great animated features of Disney. In 1979, appeared before the National MUFON Convention and said that the federal government had approached Disney to make a film, a documentary that would reveal the reality of extraterrestrial visitation and show aliens and classified film of UFOs. And he said that the government offer was withdrawn during the preparations to make this film and that the project was suddenly canceled. But he was privy to the conversations that were leading up to it. I mentioned Dorothy Kilgallen, Hollywood reporter who had talked about the downing of a UFO in Spitsbergen. F. Lee Bailey, who I worked for on lie detector. Here's Betty Hill. We already talked about her appearance on lie detector. She did pass her lie detector test. Ed Gelb, who issued the polygraph, was the same polygrapher who was president of the American Polygraph Association, and he gave the lie detector tests to all the witnesses to Travis Walton's abduction, Snowflake, Arizona case. Many of you saw the movie about Travis Walton, Fire in the Sky. And Ed Gelb put his reputation behind the fact that all of those witnesses were telling the truth when they said there was a flying saucer, Travis Walton was abducted. And he declared that there was less than one chance in a million that those 6 people could have conspired to make this up, and all of them, not all of them passing the polygraph, not one of them failing. Couldn't happen. He lent his reputation to the fact that, yes, this is happening. That took some courage. Tracy Torme, the screenwriter, son of Mel Torme, wrote Fire in the Sky. He also wrote the screenplay for The Intruders, based on the Bud Hopkins book. Went on to bring you the TV series Sliders. We all know about Shirley MacLaine going out on a limb to say she believed in aliens and how she was ridiculed for it. Robert Stack, the host of Unsolved Mysteries, has played a role in Hollywood's part in this. So has Mike Farrell, who hosted a documentary called UFO Cover-Up Live. Dan Aykroyd, who had a series called The Psi Factor, another one, Chronicles of the Paranormal. He believes that that the ET visitation is happening, is incredibly interested in the face on Mars, extraterrestrial archaeology. He's made a contribution to the field. Whitley Strieber was a science fiction writer. He came out with Communion. Many, many weeks on the bestseller list. This introduced the image of the gray with the almond-shaped black eyes to the popular culture. It had a profound effect. Linda Moulton Howe, who's one of our speakers here at the conference, earned an Emmy Award for her show called An Alien Harvest, which was about cattle mutilation and the possibility of alien involvement in that cattle mutilation phenomenon. She followed it with this book, and she's published a number of other books. She is truly a brave soul, talented producer, and I think one of the singular people in this field. We all know about Chris Carter and X-Files. Do you know that Gillian Anderson, the skeptic in in the X-Files. Let's see, she played Mulder. No, wait a minute, she played Scully. I'm sorry, my mistake. And Scully, of course, the name was inspired by Scully, who wrote Behind the Flying Saucers, the Daily Variety reporter I mentioned a moment ago. In any event, she's a skeptic on the X-Files. She's a believer in real life. Barry Sonnenfeld, I think though Men in Black was an outrageous comedy, that it made a great contribution. We could laugh at this notion that there is a secret government agency designed to monitor the alien intervention problem and make witnesses forget what they've seen. I think it really, as I say, made an important contribution, though obviously not a serious film. David Garcia, we won't look at this clip now, but he's a Fox reporter who has covered Area 51 and shown on television many of those anomalous craft that have been spotted flying over Area 51, making them real to many, many, many television viewers. They're a fact, those sort of anti-gravity machines spotted over the base. We mentioned George Knapp before, the Las Vegas reporter who first brought us the story of Bob Lazar. Though Lazar's credibility has been questioned, Knapp had a lot of courage to bring it forward. He's also had courage in the trips he's taken to Russia since the fall of the Soviet Union to bring back documents on ufology from Russia. Why would I mention Carl Sagan, who so many ufologists feel obstructed their work at every turn, who dismissed the evidence, who wouldn't look at the evidence, who is an anathema to many people in the field? I mention him for the following reasons. He was the first great supporter of SETI, which was a noble goal, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. His book, Contact, is a profound contribution to the idea of ET contact. And though he didn't believe in the face on Mars, like he didn't believe in UFOs, nevertheless, in his final book, The Demon Haunted World, he said for the first time that the question on the face on Mars was a valid scientific issue, and NASA should rephotograph it, had an obligation to rephotograph it because it was an important testable hypothesis about extraterrestrials before the public. His saying that at the time he did, shortly before his death, resulted in NASA rephotographing the face on Mars at a time when they had no intention whatsoever to do it, and it was done over the protests of Michael Malin, who was in charge of photography for the expedition. For that purpose, let's mention Carl Sagan. We don't have time for the clip on Contact and his statements about the UFO evidence. Arthur C. Clarke, in a category, in a sense, like Carl Sagan, though not a scientist, a great science fiction writer who brought us 2001, always a skeptic about UFOs, always coming on the side that there's not enough evidence to declare that they're real. Finally, within the last couple of years, he declared he believes he can now state for certain that NASA has found life on Mars, that the evidence from the NASA photography has now convinced him not only that there was ancient life, but that there is life on Mars today. This was a huge leap for Arthur C. Clarke and a huge leap for ufology. Art Bell's contribution is obvious. And I want to end this talk with a clip about Steven Spielberg, who of course brought us E.T., Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and the miniseries about alien abduction called Taken, which was on just last year and is now available on DVD. We will close seeing Steven Spielberg and J. Allen Hynek discussing the meaning of Close Encounters of the First, Second, and Third Kind. I think we've also got Richard Dreyfuss in this rare clip, which came out at the time of the release of Close Encounters.
In a rare interview from the set, a young Steven Spielberg, Richard Dreyfuss, and government UFO researcher Dr. J. Allen Hynek explain the terminology of Close Encounters.
Well, close encounter of the first kind is one that's close, but nothing really happened. Close encounter of the first kind is visible contact with a UFO. Forget the shape, forget how fast it's going. Something that you just can't explain. Close encounter of the second kind are those which leave a physical trace. Holes in the ground, burn rings, broken tree branches, telephone lines down, animals disturbed, stopping of car engines. And the close encounters of the third kind are the most interesting of all. Close encounter of the third kind is really when you meet it.
Close encounter of the third kind is really when you meet him. We'll let that be Steven Spielberg's answer as to whether or not he's a believer. Thank you very much. I hope I see you at my lecture tomorrow. At the lecture, we will talk about the details of the public debunking campaign that followed the release of the movie Roswell. I want you to hear some of the attacks that were made by the mainstream media against Stanton Friedman, Colonel Corso, and all of those involved in bringing the case before the public. Thanks again.
You showed two of my favorite movies. The Thing, I saw that when I was a kid, and it was the original cut, where they had the airman hanging upside down. And every time I saw it after that, it was cut. It was cut out.
It's too gruesome?
It was too gruesome. Do you know where I can get the original? Is it available anywhere? And the same thing about Things to Come. That originally was over 2 hours. I saw it once on PBS, and it was tremendous. Whether in the aircraft,
That the original version may be. You'll have to track it down.
87 minutes. That's all I can get. It's been 40 minutes cut out of it.
I think I've seen a longer version than that.
I was interested in the contribution of the and then
Yes.
and Henry Wayne detailed why it's wonderful contribution and very early film scientific technical information like Patterson L. Chalk made one of the earliest films he included the Edmund the Trimton Utah film and Newhouse film on there and God just really went out on yeah, it was about that same time. They really stepped on that.
The thing about this idea
Just
of profiles of UFO courage is that you can expand it and expand it and expand it.
But both of those.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I was just where you threw up like Carl saying when I heard about it. Great partner. I mean, not that.
It was never, I don't think he ever did a turnaround about the UFO, but it was about the fact that the questions that had been raised were worthy of getting the answer and collecting the evidence.
Yes, I know that the answer will be, but how much courage is that going to argue with people on the internet? News groups. Because I've done it many times where like arguing with people.
Right?
Topic.
Do you use your own name?
No, I don't. Because they don't, I know they stick out brutal, but they still.
Well, I know that you're devoting your time to do it.
I know it takes no, I'm not saying it takes any courage. Oh, shit. However, I'm just wondering.
I think it's always good to respond to the questions. It's a war for dialogue.
Enjoy the book. That one's 4th grade to adult.
Thank you.
The other one is New England Interlude, 6th grade to adult. No, I ran out of my other business cards. Did a lot of networking.
Thanks for coming, Diane.